Okay, so we always like to take a look at what's happening with stocks in different markets, and you found some really, really interesting stuff about Hong Kong.
Yeah, it's been a pretty wild ride for Hong Kong stocks over
Hmm.
the last couple of years, and we've got this analysis from Sheila Wang, someone we've talked about before,
Right.
and she's highlighting, I mean, some pretty massive shifts and some potential opportunities too.
Well, let's dive into this then. So
Hmm.
Sheila Wang, for anyone who doesn't remember, we talked about her back in October of 2023.
Right.
I think when we were looking at where were the good investment opportunities, and at the time she was pointing to Hong Kong.
Yeah, and it's really interesting because she specifically mentioned in this more recent analysis that people who followed her advice back then
Right.
and took her dollar cost averaging approach into
Mm.
things like Chinese concept stocks and Hong Kong ETFs could be looking at returns close to 50%,
Wow. So she
which is pretty
yeah,
impressive.
she's been on a roll, it seems.
Yeah, for sure.
So let's rewind then back to October of 2023
Okay.
when we were looking at her analysis. What kind of opportunities was she highlighting back then?
Well, I mean, the title of her report from back then was, "Is there investment value in Hong Kong stocks?"
Okay.
So I think right there that kind of gives you a sense of maybe the sentiment at the time.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe people weren't so sure about Hong Kong stocks.
Right.
But she was pointing out some obvious investment opportunities, she said in the report, and that she was using this dollar cost averaging strategy.
Right.
So, she definitely saw some potential there, even back then.
So she was seeing something that the rest of the market wasn't.
Yeah, it seems that way.
Okay, interesting. So then fast forward to now 2025,
Right.
and we're looking at what she's describing as a massive comeback in Hong Kong stocks.
Yeah, big turnaround.
So what is it that's driving this surge?
Well, she's really pointing to this optimistic sentiment surrounding technology trends. And she makes this really interesting point that it's not just about the optimism existing; it's the depth of that optimism
Okay.
and what she calls the imagination space.
Imagination space. What does that mean?
Yeah, so she's talking about the potential for, even more excitement and belief in this whole growth narrative surrounding tech.
Ah, yeah.
Kind of like how much further can this go?
Right.
And she sees a lot of potential there.
Okay, so that sounds like a really interesting concept. We should maybe unpack that a little bit more. This idea of imagination space,
Yeah.
because it seems like it's tied to this idea that even though we've seen a big run up,
Mm,
there's still room for more growth.
exactly. Because if people can still imagine, even bigger and better things coming out of this sector,
Yeah.
then that can fuel further investment and drive prices even higher.
Right. So it's almost like the market's kind of betting on what it thinks the future potential could be.
Yeah, and she's saying that right now that potential is still very much alive.
Interesting. Okay, so let's talk about valuations then, because that's whenever you have a big run up in prices,
Right.
people start to wonder, well, okay, is it overvalued now?
Exactly. Are we too late to the party?
Have we missed the boat?
Yeah.
So what's her take on where valuations stand right now?
So she actually says that Hong Kong stocks still look pretty reasonably valued from a static perspective.
Okay.
So whether you compare them to other assets globally or you look at their historical valuations,
Mhm.
they're still kind of on the lower end.
Interesting. So even after this run up, she's saying that they're not.
Yeah, not necessarily overvalued.
Okay.
And there are different ways to measure this, but even if you look at like price to earnings ratios,
Right.
for a lot of these companies in Hong Kong, they're still below their historical averages.
Hmm.
And they compare favorably to some other major global markets.
Interesting. Okay, so there's that sense that even though we've seen this big run up,
Hmm.
there might still be some room to run.
Yeah, that's what the data suggests at least.
Okay. And now I'm sure some people listening are thinking, well, okay, but what if this is it?
Right.
What if the rally's over and we're about to see a big correction?
Yeah, that's always a concern.
Yeah.
And she does address that possibility.
Yeah.
She says we could see some short-term pullbacks.
Right.
But she thinks those would probably be more due to prices just rising too quickly
Okay.
rather than some fundamental change in the outlook.
Got it.
So almost like the market needs to take a breather.
Right.
And she actually suggests that those pullbacks could be opportunities to buy,
Okay.
especially if you missed out on the initial move.
So she's saying don't panic if you see a dip.
Right.
That might actually be a good time to jump in.
Exactly. Try to buy the dip, as they say.
Okay. So let's dig into her reasoning a little bit more.
Yeah.
Then why is she so bullish on Hong Kong stocks for the midterm?
Well, she highlights two main reasons. First, she talks about the growing global recognition of China's technological capabilities.
Okay.
So this is kind of a shift in perception on a global level.
Right.
People are starting to really see China as a major player in tech. And then secondly, she says that global capital is beginning to reassess the value of the tech sector in general,
Okay.
especially in light of this whole AI plus various industries narrative.
Right. So this idea that AI is going to be integrated into everything.
Exactly. And that's driving a lot of excitement and investment.
Okay. And it's interesting because, just over a year ago, the outlook was pretty different.
Yeah, things can change so quickly in the market.
So let's talk about some specific investment avenues now.
Okay.
She outlines three main areas that she sees as potential opportunities in Hong Kong stocks.
Right.
Let's start with Hong Kong tech itself.
Okay.
The big names like Alibaba and Tencent.
Yeah. So she sees a lot of potential there for valuation recovery. Even though they've gone up recently, she thinks there's still room for their valuations to improve further. And obviously they have strong growth prospects.
Right.
So that makes them attractive to investors.
But she does mention some volatility in their stock prices.
Yeah. They can be a bit of a roller coaster.
Right. So how should investors approach that?
Well, she suggests considering adding to your positions during pullbacks.
Okay, so again, kind of that buy the dip strategy.
Exactly.
All right, so that's Hong Kong tech. The second area she talks about is high dividend stocks,
Right.
things like banks and telecommunications companies.
Yeah, so this is a different kind of investment approach. It's more about that steady stream of income.
Right.
And she highlights how important this is for long-term capital allocation, especially for institutional investors like insurance companies.
Okay.
They need those reliable income streams.
Right. So what kind of yields are we talking about here?
Well, she says the average dividend yield for companies in the Hang Seng Index is around 4%, although historically it's been closer to 4.5%.
Got it.
And then if you look at the Hong Kong Start Connect program, which allows investors in mainland China to invest in Hong Kong stocks,
Right.
a lot of the large companies there have dividend yields over 5%.
Wow. So that's pretty significant.
Yeah, definitely attractive for income-seeking investors.
Are there any particular sectors that tend to have those higher dividend yields?
Yeah, traditionally sectors like finance, real estate, utilities.
Okay.
She even mentions some Chinese telecom and energy firms that have yields in the 5 to 7% range.
Wow.
And then she also highlights some specific indices that track high dividend stocks,
Okay.
like the Hang Seng High Dividend Yield Index, which has had an average yield of 7 to 8%,
Okay.
and then the CSI Index for high dividend stocks in the Hong Kong Stock Connect,
Oh, yeah.
which is currently yielding around 6.6%.
So it sounds like there's some really good opportunities there for people who are looking for income.
Yeah, definitely.
So who would you say is the ideal investor for this kind of high dividend stock strategy?
Well, she describes it as being suitable for investors who prioritize those stable cash returns,
Okay.
who have a long-term investment horizon and a moderate risk tolerance.
So not necessarily looking for those big, quick gains.
Right. More about that slow and steady approach.
Got it.
So, maybe people who are approaching retirement or already in retirement looking for income.
Right.
Or people who just prefer that buy and hold strategy.
Okay.
Rather than trying to time the market.
Right. So more of a passive income approach.
Exactly.
All right. So that's high dividend stocks.
Yeah.
The third area she mentions is innovative pharmaceuticals.
Right.
She says there's a potential for 20 to 30% growth there.
Yeah, she sees a lot of potential in that sector.
But she doesn't go into a ton of detail in this particular analysis, does she?
No, she kind of teases it a little bit.
Right.
And says that the specific recommendations are in her full investment analysis report.
Okay, so if people are interested in that, they'll have to dig a little deeper.
Yeah, check out the full report.
Okay, so we've talked about these specific sectors, but she also talks about the importance of mindset, right?
Yes, absolutely.
What does she say about that?
Well, she really emphasizes that investing is a long-term game.
Okay.
She compares it to a marathon, not a sprint.
Right.
And I think that's really important to remember, especially after a period of rapid gains. It's easy to get caught up in the excitement and think it's going to last forever.
Right, but you got to keep that long-term perspective.
Exactly.
And she also talks about the importance of staying informed, right?
Yes, especially for investors who are exposed to multiple markets,
Okay.
like the Asia-Pacific region and U.S. stocks.
Hmm.
You know, you got to keep track of what's happening globally.
Right. So it sounds like she's really advocating for this global investment mindset.
Yeah, for sure.
And she's also going to continue providing updates,
Mm.
right? So she's going to kind of guide people along this journey.
Ex-
Okay, so let's recap the key takeaways here.
Right.
We've seen this huge comeback in Hong Kong stocks,
Mm-hmm.
driven by this optimism around technology trends.
Especially AI.
Right.
AI is a big
Valuations are still looking relatively low.
Yeah, based on historical data.
So there might be more room to run.
Potential,
Short-term pullbacks are possible.
but they could be buying opportunities.
Right.
Not necessarily a sign of the end.
And she's highlighted 3 main investment areas.
Right.
Hong Kong tech for growth,
Yep.
high dividend stocks for income,
Mm-hmm.
and then innovative pharmaceuticals as an area for further research.
Yep. That's a great summary.
So as we wrap up, here's a final thought for you.
Okay.
Sheila talked about this imagination space within technology trends
Right.
and how that's driving this whole rally.
Mm-hmm.
So given the incredible advancements we're seeing in AI,
Yeah.
what do you think is going to be the next big thing?
Mm.
What's going to capture the market's imagination next?
That's a great question.
Yeah. And where will those new opportunities emerge?
It's definitely something to think about.
All right. Well, thanks for exploring this with us.
My pleasure.
And we'll see you next time on The Deep Dive.
See you then.